I hope this is recording because I didn't see it count down. But anyway, hey, good morning, y'all. Currently, I am probably at a soccer game or driving the bus back. But anyway, we're going to find trig ratios from coordinates again. Okay, so yesterday we found them all and they were all in the first quadrant, which is super easy because in the first quadrant, everything is positive, right? That's what that little plot on the home screen means. In the first quadrant, all of the trig functions are positive, right? Because x is positive, y is positive, your hypotenuse is positive, everything's good. In the second quadrant, the sign is positive, right? Because the sign is associated with your y value. It's the opposite over the hypotenuse. Okay? The hypotenuse is always positive, by the way. We're never going to have a negative length for the hypotenuse. But we have a positive y value and a negative x. So the opposite sign will be positive. So the sine, S-I-N, and the cosecant are both positive. But cosine, tangent, secant, and cotangent are negative because they are x values, right? They have an x in them. In the third quadrant, it's the tangent that's positive because the tangent is an opposite over the adjacent. And in this case, both of them are negatives, and a negative over a negative is a positive. So the tangent and the cotangent are positive in the third quadrant. And then in the fourth quadrant, the cosine, because the cosine is an x value, right? The adjacent side, the cosine is positive, and the secant, by the way, the cosine and the secant are both positive in the fourth quadrant. Okay, so we really need to pay attention to where our point is on your graph. So -3, +4 is a second quadrant point, right? The x value is negative and the y value is positive. So when we put this point on here at -3, +4, you always draw your vertical line down to the x-axis, you draw back to the origin, and then you draw out to your point. Okay, and this is going to be your reference angle. Okay, so your reference angle now is made with your still close to the origin, and we have a +4 value and a -3 for the x. Okay, because you're going left, the x value or the adjacent side is negative. Now, when we do Pythagoras, of course, 4 squared plus parentheses, -3 squared equals r squared, we end up getting a +5 because -3 squared is, of course, +9. Okay, so no matter what the sign of the value is, your squaring will always be positive. Okay, I hope you remember that. So we have a -3 as your adjacent side, a +4, and a +5 hypotenuse. Okay, so the sign is 4/5, opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine is -3/5 because the x value, the adjacent side, is negative. And the tangent is also going to be negative because it's 4 over -3. Okay, and if one part of your fraction is negative, then the whole thing is negative. So the reciprocals, the cosecant is 5/4. Okay, positive 5/4, positive over positive. The secant is once again a 5 over a -3. Okay, the x value in the second quadrant is negative. And then the cotan of theta is going to be -3/4. Okay, so depending on the quadrant, right, when one of the three sides, it's not a negative length, but it's a negative point. Okay, so that's really what I want to get across here is even though it's it's not technically a negative length, but because it's in the second quadrant, this side is negative. Okay, so -6, -2, okay, is way over here in the third quadrant. 6 and 2 is here. -6, -2. Okay, so once again, you draw your triangle up to the x-axis. Okay, you always go to the x-axis, and then you come back to the origin, and then you come back to your point. Okay, so here your reference angle is going downwards, right? It's kind of an inverted triangle. So we have -6 as the x value, a -2 as the y value, right? Your opposite side and your adjacent side. And then once again, we had Pythagoras, which says -6 squared plus negative 2 squared equals hypotenuse squared. Okay, so this is a positive 36 and a positive 4. So once again, the square root of 40, right, reduces to, or rather simplifies to 4 and 10. I think we've done this a couple of times now. So the square root of 4 is 2, and then of course we have root 10 that's going on here. Okay, this hypotenuse is always going to be positive, okay, regardless of the sign of your other values. Okay, so let's get to writing down your trigs. So the sign here is negative 2 over 2 roots of 10, okay, which once again we reduce, right, before we rationalize. So negative root 10 over 10. Okay, the cosine is similar. It's a negative 6 over 2 roots of 10. So we simplify first to make this a 3. So negative 3 root 10 over 10. And then the tangent is negative 2 over negative 6, which is positive 1/3. Okay, like I said, in the third quadrant, since it's a negative x over a negative y, negative y over negative x, you have a positive tangent value. Okay, so now let's hit those reciprocals. The cosecant is going to be, right, it's going to be hypotenuse over opposite, so root 2 roots of 10 over negative 2, okay, which cancels out and it just becomes negative root 10. Sorry, that's an equal sign. Negative root 10 over 1, right, which is just root 10. And then we have the secant, which is 2 roots of 10 over negative 6, okay, which is negative root 10 over 3. So the secant is negative also. And then the cotangent, negative 6 over negative 2, which is a positive 3. So in the second quadrant, the tangent is the thing that's positive, and all the other 4 trig values are negative, okay, in this third quadrant. The third quadrant, sine and cosine are negative, and the tangent is positive. Okay, and then our last one, this example is a fourth quadrant one, right? 4 and negative 8 is in the fourth quadrant. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8 down. So from here, you draw your triangle back up to the x-axis. We always go to the x-axis, and then we go home to the origin, and then we go back out to your point. Okay, and the reference angle is always closest to the origin. So we have a 4 as your x distance and a negative 8 as your y coordinate there. Okay, and then let's see, what was the 16 plus 64? I believe is 80. Adding 80. So 80 is actually 16 and 5, guys, not just 4 and 20, because 20 can go further. 16 is the biggest radical that goes into 80. So this is 4 roots of 5 as your hypotenuse. Notice it's positive, because when you square something, it becomes positive. 4 squared is positive 16. Negative 8 squared is positive 64. So your hypotenuse is always going to be a positive number. Always, always, always. So sine, in this case, is the opposite side, negative 8 over 4 roots of 5, okay, which we simplify to negative 2 over root 5. Okay, the cosine is going to be a positive because the adjacent side is positive 4 over 4 roots of 5, okay, which simplifies to 1 over root 5. And then the tangent, which is the opposite side, negative 8 over positive 4, the tangent is once again negative. So the cosine and the secant have positive values in this fourth quadrant. Okay, this is the fourth quadrant down here. So let's do the reciprocals. I'm going to reciprocate this one because it's easiest, I think. So the cosecant of theta is root 5 over 2, and it's negative, right? We had a negative here, so the cosecant is negative also. The secant is negative root 5 over 1. Oh, sorry, positive root 5. What is that doing in there? Wowzers, this is a positive 1 over root 5, so this needs to be a positive root 5 over 1. Secant and cosine are positive when you have a fourth quadrant point. Where is my brain? There it is. Okay, cotangent is negative 4 over 8, which is negative 1/2. Okay, so no longer are these quote unquote like lengths, okay, but rather it's the coordinate. So if the coordinate is negative, then that side of your triangle has a negative value, okay, because it's in a different quadrant than it was before. I know that's kind of confusing, but it's going to make a lot more sense as we do more and more of these. Okay, so that's how we're going to that's how we're going to do all of these problems that have points in a quadrant other than the first quadrant. Because in the first quadrant, everything is positive. Sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, cotangent. Because your x and your y values are positive. Okay, and then in the second quadrant, your y's remain positive, but anything with an x, okay, all of your adjacent stuff. So your cosine, your tangent, your secant, and your cotangent are negative when the adjacent side is negative. Okay, and in the third quadrant, you have both opposite and adjacent sides negative, which means you have a positive tangent, because negative over negative is a positive. And remember, the hypotenuse is always going to be a positive number no matter what. Okay, so hopefully that's all right. Just know that the signs will be positive and negative now as we move forward.